salvation to tell. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace.
Good morning. Welcome to our service of worship and workshop. Today is another intentional interim ministry time where we combine worship and workshop time. And so I hope that you are ready to stay with us through till about 11:30 today, we think. I hope you have some refreshments handy. Yes, it's a lovely day here in Canmore. It's not yet 35 degrees. Friends, as we always do, we acknowledge the land upon which we live and worship, pray together. And for me here in Canmore, this is the traditional territories of the Stoney Nakoda people, who were known by other nations on either side of them, on the prairies and in the mountains, because they were our people of the Rockies. They were known as the people of the Shining Mountains. So the Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Wesley, members of the Stoney Nakoda people and all signatories to Treaty 7, as well as all those who are members of Métis Region 3. Lisa.
We would like to start by acknowledging that we walk and meet upon the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples, whose presence here continues to this day. We acknowledge that this is the treaty lands of the Williams Treaty, and we thank the Indigenous people for sharing this land with us. We would also like to acknowledge the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation as our closest Indigenous community. We acknowledge this land and the people because the first step to reconciliation is recognizing the existence of Indigenous people. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to action numbers 62 and 63 speak to the significance of recognition as a key to reconciliation. A shared understanding of how our collective past brought us to where we are today will help us walk together into a better future.
Thank you, Lisa. And a tradition that I have, and I invite you to join me in, is to light a candle. If we were in worship space, it would be probably a good-sized Christ candle. In my little space up here on the top floor of my condo, it's a little candle. We live and breathe, sleep, live out our days in the presence of Christ. But when we worship, we light a candle as a physical reminder of Christ being the center of our worship and our time together. Michelle, would you like to do the welcome? And you are muted. There we
Sorry,
go.
got it. Here at St. Andrew's United Church, our mission includes inspiring faith, practicing compassion, and building connection in our community and the world. And we have a vision to be courageous and creative people empowered by the Spirit to practice love, reconciliation, and justice with authenticity, to be a spiritual home where Jesus' love for all is visible as we serve our diverse and multi-generational community.
Thank you. Do you have any announcements that you would like to share, Michelle? I meant to ask you that earlier in the tech meeting.
Not today. No, thank you.
Okay. I do want to say thank you to Michelle, who has taken a leadership role in keeping a message on St. Andrew's United Church sign following the current events, the tragic death of the family in London, and with the ongoing discoveries of unmarked graves on the sites of former residential schools. So thank you. Thank you, Michelle, for that. And she's been including the council in those deliberations. I do want to just make a quick note. We are going into breakout rooms in a little while. And I want to just highlight for those of you who are on the phones, you are able to unmute yourselves by pressing *6. And then if you press *6 again, that will mute you. So I am looking forward to being in the rooms with all of you and those of you who are here on the phones. Today's service is being led not just by me, but also by your transition team. And so I'm going to turn things over to Gwyneth, who has a prayer from John Wesley for us.
The prayer of approach was written by John Wesley. O merciful God, whatever you may deny me, do not deny me this love. Save me from the idolatry of loving the world or any of the things of the world. Let me never love any creature but for your sake and in subordination to your love. Take full possession of my heart. Raise there your throne and command there as you do in heaven. Being created by you, let me live to you. Being created for you, let me ever act for your glory. Being redeemed by you, let me render to you what is yours, and let my spirit ever cleave to you alone.
Thank you, Gwyneth. And our first hymn today is a good meditative hymn to take us into this reflective time together. Come and find the quiet center, verses 1 and 3. It's number 374. Let's sing this with Michael. Into our scripture reading today, The transition team, as we were planning this worship / workshop time together, we were not bound by the lectionary. And it was actually Henry who suggested this reading, and it turns out he's our reader today. Henry, would you read for us?
Good morning, everyone. This morning's reading comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verses 1 to 8. Everything has its time. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to plant up with what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to throw away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to fall away. A time to tear, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Henry. Well, St. Andrew's United Church certainly has lived through many, many, many seasons. As individuals and as groups, we grow through reflection on the seasons of our lives. When have been the times that we have planted? When have been the times that we have harvested? There are times to break down, and there are times to build up. There are times to mourn, and there are times to dance, unless, of course, you're a Methodist. Now, as a community of faith, you have made a point of celebrating your anniversaries. I've been hearing about them. Telling the stories of your past is a healthy habit. Today is not an anniversary celebration. We're in the wrong month for that. Today, though, and the intentional interim event that will take place at the end of August are intentional congregational events to accomplish that important harvesting of your long history. Further along in your intentional interim process, you will be considering the third of those primary questions. Remember those? The third question, that's who are we? Who are our neighbors? And who is God calling us to be? So the third of those questions is, who is God calling you to do, to be, and what your calling is to do? So we really need to take a look at that first question, who are we? And a piece of that is really taking seriously the gifts and the challenges of the history we have. So today, we are looking at the historic foundations of who St. Andrew's United Church has been from the time of the Methodist circuit riders, when they first met the first settlers in the Markham area. And fortunately, we do have an excellent source book written by Reverend Miles for the 175th anniversary of St. Andrew's United Church. There is a lot of history here, and we've just been looking at the first half of the book. So as we've looked at the first half of the book, we have tried to, as a team, find ways to distill a few of the key elements of the early Methodist impact on this faith family. And so we're going to tell some stories. And A huge thank you to Devisha, who took a look at the book and distilled down 4 stories for us. So we're going to hear from circuit rider Elijah Woolsey, and we're going to hear from Brother Richard Barnhart, who was a key music leader in the early time of the circuit rider churches. And Richard Barnhart was a formerly enslaved person in the States who came to Canada through the Underground Railway to seek freedom. We're going to hear from a converted person, Johnson Williams, whose life got turned around. And we're going to hear from Letitia Humans, a temperance movement representative. So first of all, we'll hear from Elijah Woolsey, AKA Henry.
Good morning, everyone. This morning, I have another role, to play, and that is the role of circuit rider Elijah Woolsey. But before I tell you my story, I'll give you some historical background. In 1834, slavery in Upper and Lower Canada was abolished completely with the passage of the British Parliament Slavery Abolition Act. It was the circuit riding saddleback preachers that were the driving force behind the Great Awakening in Canada and the United States. They were the passengers of faith and hope. Circuit riders would travel city to city, town to town, village to village, and home to home to preach the gospel. When the first 10 circuit riders of Upper Canada began their work, the message served to convert people to faith in Christ and convict them of the sin of slavery. They were to declare and convince people of the need for a new life in Jesus and have them show evidence of what new life by how they lived. One of the ways for them to show it was by becoming abolitionists and by immediately freeing the slaves they held. Many of those slaves came to the church at the same time. And now I'm going to tell you the story, my story, as Elijah Woolsey. I'm Elijah Woolsey. I have traveled in New York State, Canada, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania in my times as circuit rider. Similar to those before me, I traveled a very large circuit in Upper Canada. It was sometimes over 800 miles around, and it would take me 8 or 9 weeks to complete before I was able to return home to see my wife and family. During my circus, I spent many days and nights stricken with cold and fevers after traveling thousands of miles by foot and by boat. Sometimes I had no bed to lie on, no blankets to cover me in the coldest weather. My saddlebags were my pillow and my greatest comfort. I was given the hardest circus known for their poverty and reckless and unchanging behavior. At 21 years of age, I was appointed to be a circuit rider in Canada. And after 2 years of service, I was ordained a deacon in the Church of God. And I was ordained an elder the very next day. Not quite a regular appointment. Many know me as diligent, faithful, and I'm often commended for my ability to help people see the light. But truly, I just believe in God's transformative love and power. Yes, I just believe in God's transformative love and power.
Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Brother Richard Barnhart, AKA Tara.
Morning. I will start again with some history of the time. Some hundred, perhaps thousands of slaves had escaped from Virginia and Kentucky into Upper Canada in 1829. The British government informed the American minister that it is utterly impossible for them to agree to a stipulation for the surrender of fugitive slaves, as they could not depart from the principle that every man is free who reaches British ground. This knowledge spread like wildfire throughout the Underground Railroad in the United States, and in particular in Virginia and Kentucky. The fear of the government allowing the slave owners to enter Upper Canada to capture and return the runaway slaves to the United States had now been put to rest. Those held as slaves now knew that there was a promised land, and if they were to reach it, they would be free the moment their foot touched the British soil of Upper Canada. It was at this point that I, Richard Barnhard, made the decision to run. I took the most established and well-known underground Eastern Railroad route, where safe houses were established by abolitionist sympathizers. These individuals were often organized in small independent groups, which helped to maintain secrecy. Us who escaped had to move most often at night along the route. I kept running all the way to York Township, where I finally stopped, because of the knowledge given to me upon arriving that land was being sold to new African Canadian immigrants in the York Township area for us to settle and raise a family. I built a home and set out to become a member of the community. And I became a leading and respected member of the Markham Methodist Circuit. They referred to me as Brother Barnhard. I led the choir for the circuit for 25 years, which included leading at camp meetings, weekly services, and revival meetings. In my position, I would start the worship service by striking the first note. Though I could not read or write, I would spend the days before service memorizing the songs and the music notes. My leadership brought life and strength to the circuit. I was one who was clearly respected by the whole. I could not write, though, so my history with the Methodist Church was chronicled by those who did record history. And so the story of my life we have is from one perspective, but I was able to be a leader in the music of our church. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Richards. The next person we're going to hear from is a man whose life was turned around, and it sounds like it needed to be turned around. Johnson Williams, also known as Rick.
The common event of growing the church was revival meetings. They were protracted meetings that would continue for a week or two at a time, but could last as long as a month. They would begin in one area of the circuit, and when it felt like all they could do was accomplished, they would move on to the next location. Camp meetings were unique events within the Methodist Church that were held in open fields. The meetings were a combination of church conventions and revival meetings. These camp meetings did seek conversions, but they were to educate and encourage the faithful as well. On the Markham circuit, we opened early in the autumn and commenced revival meetings. The church was small but strong in faith. The second revival meeting was opened at the field of Carmel. This place had not been productive of much fruit for 6 years, Satan having almost taken it as his own. There was drinking, fighting, and bad behavior in this area. But after some time, the Church of God took to themselves the whole armor and fought the battles of the Lord. After 2 or 3 courses of prayer, the Holy Ghost came down and fell upon both saint and sinner. Tears fell from the eyes of all in silence, and then the work began. And they had a blessed time through the meeting, which lasted 6 weeks. I found myself in Carmel under the control of alcohol. Me, Johnson Williams. I had lost my family, my job, and my way. I had no sight for my future. I felt like my life didn't matter, and so I didn't take care of myself. Yet one night, broken in my sorrow, I felt a comforting presence. And when I woke in the morning, I felt compelled to go out to those who arrived and have been praying in the fields. I didn't know what they were talking about. I didn't know how to pray, but I stayed. That same divine presence brought me comfort again. And I heard, "Find rest here." I never knew I was so exhausted until that moment. Life weighed on my shoulders. But in that moment, the burden left me and tears filled my eyes. 6 weeks later, I found faith. I found community. I found the Markham circuit. I found God's love. From here, I build.
Thank you, Johnson. And the final person we are visiting today is Letitia Humans, who has a message for us, most important, from the Temperance Women's Movement.
In Markham, drinking itself an issue much debated. For innkeepers, the sales of liquor were the basis of their livelihood. Alcoholic drinks became more common and were generally expected to be provided in exchange for harvesting labor. As the years passed, the temperance movement gathered strength in response to this, and the contention between the two sides was ongoing. The Methodist Church was very active in the temperance movement, and it remains one of the many reasons that during communion, grape juice is served instead of wine. The use of alcohol from Methodism early beginnings was seen as dangerous and damaging to the believer. So when the temperance movement began in the late 1800s, it was natural that the church women became their strongest and most prominent leaders. I'm Letitia Humans. Myself and a group of Methodist church women asked the city council to stop selling tavern licenses. But the revenues from licenses and the sales of liquor was too significant for the local politicians to give up. So I founded the Dominion of Canada chapter of the Women's Christian Temperance Union and lobbied citizens to sign pledges of abstinence. I argued that alcohol caused greater emotional and economic damage than the tax and profit it brought to the politicians and innkeepers. I explained that you men look at the temperance question in its financial aspect, while we women look at it as a bartering in souls in the temporal and eternal welfare of our husbands, brothers, and sons. We look at it as an evil spirit devastating our homes and dragging our loved ones to perdition. Our compassion lied with the man who had been deceived by Satan through alcohol. Even Prime Minister Alexander Mackenzie supported us in the Temperance Act. But because we women couldn't vote, Mackenzie had little to no gain politically by fighting alongside us. Still, we remained powerful in lobbying prohibition legislation alongside our suffrage movement allies with the ability to vote. We could further influence prohibition. However, the temperance movement was abandoned in the 1920s in favor of governance sale, and the overall attitude of the movement changed as many believed the societal issues had more to do with the political and economic system than with alcohol.
Thank you. Friends, we're going to move into our breakout room time now. Each room will have a member of a longstanding Markham family. John Webster and Ann Gordon and Dorothy Middleton are going to talk about what it was like to grow up having had several generations in the area, roots going back. And I hope we get around to having a conversation about how their particular church background. It's not all Methodism. I believe the Websters were Methodist. Dorothy says she came from Mennonite stock, and Anne was influenced by Anglicanism, but also a Methodist Irish granny. So, and in the remaining time that you have, I'm sending you off into your breakout rooms for half an hour. So that gives some time to hear the stories from your guests, and also I hope to move into a conversation about how we see the deep roots of that St. Andrews has in the community, how those Methodist roots may continue to be lived out in the in our community itself, and maybe how things have changed. So I am going to send you off. You will probably get a message. Those of you on the phones, please say yes. However, the phone wants you to say yes. Those of you on computers, please press a yes button to enter either room 1, 2, or 3. There we go. Well, that was fun. I hope you folks had fun too. So I am going to take, we're going to take a few minutes and hear from whoever took notes from each of the groups. And so group 1, what did you learn about, well, what did you learn about?
Okay, Gwyneth, please chime in with what I'm missing. So we got quite a detailed story of Anne Gordon family history, the Armstrong family coming to Markham, and they were also married several times into the Reister family. So long history in Markham. We know we have things named after Armstrongs, like William Armstrong School, and there are roads and several things named after Reisters as well. So long roots in the community. We talked about the schools and the properties. So the Armstrong family was involved in the Anglican Church, originally down by Highway 7. That's now become, I think the congregation is now Grace Anglican Congregation. And there's a stone house on Captain Armstrong that's still in the Armstrong family. And her roots are also linked to Locust Hill United Church, and how the family, a lot of the communities did things together. So she was involved in camp with the Mennonite Church, and they welcomed from people from different denominations, Roman Catholics, Anglicans, Mennonites. She recounted the story of her mother not being allowed to cut her hair until she was sick, because that was believed to be just traditional. She should keep her hair, but when the doctors thought that perhaps that was maybe taking her strength, then it was allowed. Not allowed to go to dances. So when we looked at how the values affect us now, we talked about how there was never liquor allowed in the St. Andrews building until recently. There was a decision to allow council to vote to allow alcohol at weddings or at events at the church where it was requested on a case-by-case basis. So that is a recent change, but that influences us. Influences us still. It was discussed that we no longer are bound by not using many words in buying or selling, and in fact, the bazaar often finishes up sales after church on Sunday. So we're buying and selling on Sunday, and there's much discussion as it happens. But I guess our conclusion was that really we're still led by the golden rule, by doing unto others as we wish to have done to us, and not the negative way it was framed in this don't do list.
Yeah.
Gwyneth, what did I miss? I'm sure lots. No, you did well, except we talked about music, where it said about no music lessons, and we wondered what the music was like in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It,
Yeah.
it makes me think about my role, about the idea that appropriate music would be learned by heart in the church. You would.
And the other thing that was brought up was that some people now bring coffee into church, and how some other people still feel that's inappropriate.
Oh, we talked about clothes in church also, about being dressed up and being proper at church, and how many of us grew up with that and try to embrace it still, and that balance between wanting to be welcoming to everybody and understanding that not everyone is able to afford different clothes for church, and also understanding that making church comfortable is part of keeping church in the lives of some people, but that disconnects between the tradition, the white gloves, the hats. So we had a lovely discussion with our group. Thank you so much to Anne Gordon for sharing the detailed history she had prepared, and thanks to everyone for contributing.
Everybody should hear Anne Gordon's story.
Great. Okay, group 2. Rick and Lanella.
I have a funny feeling Rick is depending on me to record. Anyway, we had John Webster in our group. And so John's shared the fact that his grandfather was the superintendent of the Sunday school. So you knew that he had to be on his best behavior. And he highlighted some of the rules that we looked at and some that influenced him up for a long time and even now. Rules such as what neighbors thought, the use of God's name in vain, as we hear people say all the time, do not take God's name in vain. Church attendance, being in church every Sunday. No card games, no movie watching. And some of all of this resulted in the fact that his inability to dance and inability to play card games the way that, people know them. Use of no alcohol, which still affects him to some extent or impacts his life to some extent now. And he repeated this phrase time and time again that he heard that says, as the twig is bent, the tree is inclined. And so that had an impact on him. His parents, up until his adult days, would give him the glare whenever there's a quarrel or some issues, because that's just not allowed. The fact that issues around credit and using cash, he has that influence of that buying things on credit. He actually said, I think I'm right, that his first movie he ever saw was Mutiny on the Bounty, because they weren't allowed to watch TV and movies. There were no comics in his house. He had to go to his friend's house to read comics and had to resist the temptation to read those in the newspaper because his parents would be there. He also noted that, and most people in the group thought that they're not saying that this was necessarily the right way that things to have been done, but it's what it was in those days. Mm-hmm. And at some point later, it was noted that we didn't need to follow what was done there, but we can at least learn from the past. People in the group commented that some of these had impact on their way of life. For example, being asked to work on a Sunday. The very first time someone was asked to work on a Sunday, there was this moral struggle. To be somewhere else beside church was not the thing to do. And now, in comparison, it doesn't seem to matter. Sunday is just one of those days. Someone mentioned progress, and we have to think, what is progress in terms of what our children are doing and how children are different today. Another person mentioned that arguments in their family were very quickly squashed, and that children on a whole were quickly learned to measure the length of a rope for tolerance for quarrels and so forth that happens in the house. The use of not appropriate, but the use of vocabulary in terms of, instead of using the word God in certain situations, they would say something like, by golly, instead of saying whatever they needed to say. The vocabulary used in movies and TVs today has left us all with open mouths because of what's used on television today was not accepted.
Mm-hmm.
We ended on a very positive note with a member of our group giving us information about the connections that have been formed between seniors and youth in the York region, and the impact that these two groups are having on each other, and that youths are being more mindful nowadays of their behavior because of social media. Mm-hmm. Everything is being recorded. So they're almost back to, I guess, our days when we were thinking parents were looking at us. Now, Big Brother, social media is seeing everything. So that has impacted their behavior very much. Rick, do you think I missed anything?
Yeah, I think that was great. I just 2 minutes, 1 minute. Great summary, but very quickly at a higher level, John Webster did a fabulous job. Thank you, John. As usual in these, we started a little slow. By the end, everybody wanted to talk, sort of thing. So a very successful breakout group. I think there was a sort of a general feeling that a lot of these values from the past, some of them maybe, there's the gray areas here. Like some maybe we wouldn't do now, others we do. But maybe you need to look back a bit sometimes and think, maybe some of these were better ideas still apply a bit more than we do apply them. So there's gray areas. You don't have to go all the way one way or another sometimes, but it was very interesting. We can still think about it going forward. Values from the past that really make no sense, but others that maybe do make a bit of sense that we should bring back a bit. And finally, like Linnell said, I thought it was the highlight for me anyways. Out of the blue came this very positive message at the end of talking about the youth of today from this teacher's experience, showing more respect and manners and being, having values. And we don't hear enough positives, right? And we only hear negatives, I think, a lot of times because that's what sells. But it was so refreshing and wonderful to hear that positive message of our youth out of the blue, really, at the end of our meeting. So that would be what I would add to it.
Great. Okay, and room number 3 was Henry and I. And we had the story of Dorothy Middleton, who grew up as a Mennonite, but her family changed allegiance from the Mennonite church to the United Church. And Dorothy shared how that caused a rift within the family, at least for a time. For the most part, the family relations were repaired. Particularly in the question time when we had a chance to question Dorothy about her childhood, she told us some interesting facts about life in a Mennonite church, that the men and the women, like families would go to church all together, but the men and women sat on different sides of the church, and the most senior and respected folks were at the front, and there was sort of a strict people were in rows according to sort of their role. And so the youngest kids were in the back, and they might have tried to fool around, but they got into trouble if they were fooling around in the back row. So it was really interesting to hear about the differences between the Mennonites and the United Church. The United Church did have a Sunday school, and the Mennonites, you went to church. That was your training. But in the area, things like camps happened for everybody. And so that was pretty cool. And so thank you, Dorothy, for sharing your story. Henry, anything else about Dorothy's story that I didn't take notes? It's anything else that I should highlight? We should highlight?
I find Dorothy's history, the story is very inspiring because, you know, my reading is that she is taking change naturally. I think that is a very good lesson, at least, you know, for me to understand that, you know, there are changes, but a lot of people would just take it naturally. I think that that is something that is led by God, you know, about it.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of what we talked about as a group has been brought up in other, from other folks. Certainly the highlights around the Methodists definitely had legalisms around drinking and gambling. Those have changed, but that does continue to influence us. Certain churches are very strict around alcohol and others not so much. It wasn't that long ago that the United Church took very strong stands on gambling. How the United Church tends to highlight the golden rule and being kind to one another. Michelle brought up the importance of following up on promises with just straight up decency and respect, like taking seriously, paying what is owed, and yeah, keeping promises in general, and that it really was a show of character or lack of character, and character was really significant. We talked about kind of where some of these legalisms and attitudes came from, and that at some point those legalisms would have been a freedom, and then they became something that hemmed people in, and that things shifted. There was a comment that really a lot of the list reflected a male-oriented society, and that God was made in, like talked about only, of course, in those days as male and father, and just how that influenced the thinking, and also how that's changed, I guess. That the traditions and rituals and expectations may have lost their deeper meaning over time. And so change and renewal is good. Henry, anything I missed on our conversation? No,
you have given us a very good summary of that. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you, Dorothy. So to wrap up this time, before we go into the last part of the service, I certainly have learned a lot looking at your early history through the book, and this has been wonderful to hear stories. I was particularly moved to learn about the circuit riders' fervor to bring the power of the gospel of Jesus Christ into the lives of ordinary people, and to particularly hold up the call to abolish the sin of slavery. And Brother Richard Barnhart's story was really important to me to hear. And it also raised a question for members of the transition team. What happened next when there were these movements that were radical at the time, seeing everyone as being equal and not degrading persons of color, not degrading Indigenous people? In Alberta, when kids grew up in the United Church in Alberta, we always heard, I mean, I grew up in Saskatchewan, but children were told and taught about the great friendship between the Methodist missionary Robert Rundle and Chief Muscabatoon from central Alberta. They really were partners in the authentic claiming of Christianity for the Cree people in central Alberta. But then what happened? That the communities of Black farmers and business people who took that dangerous journey of freedom through the Underground Railway to this area, your area, to continue to, did they prosper in the same way as their European settler neighbors prospered? I know that in central Alberta, the Christian Indigenous communities were not spared the residential school experience. So it's really important to hold up these positive aspects of our history. But as Tara mentioned, it was written, the history has been written not by the Indigenous Christians or by the Black folks that came and escaped slavery. It was an interpretation by the settlers. And I'm really curious now to hear how folks would talk about it from within those communities. And it's also important to ask the questions of why we do not see the ongoing representation of Black and Indigenous leadership through the decades. Eventually, we saw the leadership of women come up, but not these other groups. So the writer of Ecclesiastes encouraged us to see and to learn and to live through all of the seasons of our lives. So let's continue this journey with our eyes wide open, and let's celebrate these great pieces of history, these great stories, and also intentionally look for the stories of those not written in the history books. So this adventure continues. We will have another historic look at St. Andrew's United Church, kind of looking at the history from the time of union in 1925 through to the present. And that's going to be taking place at the end of August. And I sure hope we continue to have lots of stories, because that's been just so much fun. Yvonne is going to sing for us, and I'd like us to assume a position, a posture of prayer, because I feel as though Yvonne is starting our prayer time. And then Tara and I are going to take us into prayer, and then we will come to the end of our service. Over to you, Yvonne.
Thank you, Shannon. Last Sunday, Father's Day, made 1 year since my mom passed away. Of course, I would not want to sing on Father's Day, so thank you, Rick, for singing. I didn't realize when I offered to sing that it was Father's Day. So a week ago, my mom died, a year ago. So I'd like to dedicate this song to her and to my friends at St. Andrew's. It's called No One But You. Who can melt the hardest heart and speak life into my soul? Who can spin the world around and hold me ever close? Who can search the depths of me and love me to the core? And who controls the world I see and walks me through it all? Lord, no one does it like you. Who has made the righteous bright? Whose feet my way with grace? Love me through my darkest hours, 1,000 different ways. No one but you, Lord. No one but you. So I'll sing of your love. I can't get enough. Oh, I just want you. The Lord of my soul, the King of my heart. Oh, Jesus, it's you. So I'll sing of your love. I can't get enough. I just want you. The Lord of my soul, the King of my heart. Oh, Jesus, it's you. Oh, Mommy, I love you too. I'll always love you. Hear the oceans roar, see the skies light up. Every heart now sing to the Lord. Hear the rocks cry out, see the mountains bow. Every heart come worship the Lord. Hear the oceans roar, see the skies light up. Every heart now sing to the Lord. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. That was a very powerful entrance into prayer for us. And so Tara and I are going to do the prayers with you. Tara, I'm going to ask you to read the prayer from Wenan, and I will come in after the silence.
Okay, this prayer is from Wenan Ing, from That All May Be One, a resource for educating toward racial justice, from the United Church of Canada. Please acknowledge God. Wise and loving God, you have created and are still creating a world rich with difference and diversity. You have created all people in your image, each expressing their being and living their life in valid, special relationship with you. For all this, we praise you.
For historic acts of injustice and oppression perpetuated against Aboriginal communities, Black and Chinese and Japanese and Chinese communities in this abundant land of the First Nations, Forgive us, merciful God. Would you like me to take the next section, or do you want to take the next section?
Okay, I could lead in prayer of the Lord's Prayer. As Christ taught us. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And we're going to sing our closing hymn, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, verses 1 and 2, hymn number 651, if you have a book in front of you.
Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but thou art mighty. Hold me with thy powerful hand. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Feed me till I want no more. Open now thy crystal fountain, whence the healing stream doth flow. Let the fire and cloudy pillar lead me on my journey through. Strong deliverer, be thou still my strength and shield. Be thou still my strength and shield. Go now in peace, never be afraid. God will go with you each hour of every day. Go now in faith, steadfast, strong, and true. Know God will guide you in all you do. Go now in love and show you believe. Reach out to others so all the world can see. God will be there watching from above. Go now in peace, in faith, and in love.
We end with words by John Wesley that Rick is reading for us.
I am no longer my own, but thine. Put me to what thou wilt. Rank me with whom thou wilt. put me to doing, put me to suffering. Let me be employed by thee, or laid aside for thee, exalted for thee, or brought low for thee. Let me be full, let me be empty. Let me have all things, let me have nothing. I freely and heartily yield all things to thy pleasure and disposal. And now, O glorious and blessed God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, thou art mine, and I am thine. So be it. And the covenant which I have made on earth, let it be ratified in heaven. Amen.
Amen, amen, hallelujah, amen. Amen, amen, hallelujah, amen. Amen, amen, hallelujah, amen.
Thank you so much for joining us today. What a lovely way to spend an hour and a half together telling stories and sharing insights. If you're able to stay around for a few minutes and visit, please do. If you have to be making your way to the rest of your day, God's blessings on your week. I'm going to change my view to gallery so I can see folks.